on? Yeah? All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out today. My name's EJ Bastian. I'm the lead eDiscovery program manager in Microsoft's internal litigation group. So I'm not actually in IT, definitely not on the sales team. I'm here to talk to you about how we manage eDiscovery ourselves. I'm here with Nagar, help me with your last name. Farchadnia, who is my counterpart at Rogers Communications, and she's here as well to talk about how they approach eDiscovery. I'm going to take the first part of the session and talk through the Microsoft story first, and then she'll take over and have her own unique spin on how they're doing eDiscovery as an Office 365 customer. Before I go any further, I'd love to know a little bit more about you. So by show of hands, can I see who's actually familiar with the concepts of eDiscovery, who manages eDiscovery in there? Yeah, great. How about people who are familiar with the eDiscovery Center in Office 2013 as it stands today? People who are, okay, a lot less of you. Interesting. Okay, cool. Well, then I will show off some stuff that we use day in, day out to make our jobs a lot easier, and maybe something that you can actually take advantage of as well. Anything you wanted to cover before jumping in?
No, I'll share with you guys the journey we had and how we used to do eDiscovery and how we plan to use it later. So I'll run right after EJ.
Great. So jumping right into it, most of you being familiar with the concept of eDiscovery, my guess is this is probably familiar graphic to a fair amount of you. This is the kind of age-old linear depiction of the EDRM, Electronic Discovery Reference Model, how people are used to thinking about the stages of eDiscovery and the linear requirements, how you go from the left to the right in order to accomplish the overall goal of eDiscovery. I've color-coded this for you so that you can see what we manage ourselves with our own FTEs, with our own internal infrastructure, the items in blue, and the items that we outsource. We found this to be the sweet spot for eDiscovery cost savings, for what is possible for us to manage internally versus what we found most efficient and least expensive to actually get somebody else to be responsible for. Kind of cut it pretty much down the middle. Review, production, presentation. Found out kind of the hard way after actually trying to bring that in-house that it's a lot cheaper to outsource, at least for us, on the scale of litigation matters that we have. But left of that, information management through processing and analysis, we've found to be where we get the most bang for our buck for investing our own resources and our own efforts into managing. For those of you who aren't intimately familiar with this, the concept is you've got information management where data lives before there's, before there's a lawsuit filed, before you need to conduct an investigation. In the information management stage, you're managing the overall policies for how long to keep the data where it lives, where it should stay, how it should be preserved. And then you get sued or you have an investigation, you catch wind that trouble's afoot, and so you have to identify all the various locations in the network where the potential content could be. You have to identify the key players who need to receive legal hold notices. And then you work towards preserving and collecting that content. Historically, people have thought, well, you have to collect in order to preserve, which is not at all the case anymore. In fact, the vast majority of what we keep for our litigation matters is protected in place using in-place hold. So people's OneDrive for Business will enable in-place hold on that. Their SharePoint sites, their mailboxes, of course, when we were using litigation hold even longer before we had the ability to use in-place hold to protect the content there so that end users can continue managing their mail how they want, editing away, deleting away, sending away, being as productive as they need to be, but the content that we need to have protected in accordance with our legal hold obligations is still there in the mailbox, and when they delete it from their deleted items, the content still gets kept in the recoverable items part of their mailbox that the end users don't know about, don't have any access to it in Outlook, but content's there and we search it whenever we're searching their mailbox as well. The same concept now applies to SharePoint and OneDrive for Business as well. People continue using that to be as productive and collaborative as they've ever wanted to be, and yet we can protect the content in place even after they delete it without having to add additional locations to search or take additional collection efforts to effectuate preservation. Of course, there are still some sources where we can't protect in place data that's not in Office 365 or in SharePoint 2013 or Exchange 2013 on-prem. So, desktop material is a classic example of that. And so we'll still collect that in order to preserve it, and we'll just put that into some litigation-managed file shares and hold on to it there. And then we're responsible for the processing piece, getting the data into a searchable state so that we can run some filters across it and find the subset that we think is actually worthwhile to have reviewed for production and presentation. We'll work with outside counsel to determine what the appropriate filters should be, and then we'll go ahead and run them, work back and forth with counsel to say, okay, well, if we run these filters like this, we'll get this much data. We know our average cull is actually that, so we should probably get a little bit better at trying to filter out a bunch of the not likely to be responsive data so we can minimize what we actually have to invest the time in downloading and then handing the data off to a litigation support vendor, because obviously there's all sorts of fees associated with that, and then you also have the security hit of downloading content, taking it out of Office 365 and handing it off to somebody who, granted, is a trusted partner, but they definitely are not under our own internal IT department's controls and security and don't have the exact same security settings and standards as our internal IT department. So the less data we have to outsource, the better. Wanted to talk to you about why that makes sense for us. So we did a little bit of analysis over our docket over the last fiscal year to boil down what the average case looked like. So we looked at all the cases where people were receiving legal holds, and beyond having legal holds, when we actually have cases that get to the eDiscovery stage where we need to collect and search data and have it reviewed and produced, there are actually 41 of those last year. The average case had 44 people who were under hold. 44 people received legal hold notices. All their data is, in general, we will at first at least apply complete broad-based hold to their content, keeping everything in their mailbox that's there when we apply the hold and everything that's added while the hold's in place. And the same goes for their SharePoint sites and OneDrive for Business sites. And we ask them to keep content in the other locations where we can't preserve it. So 44 people whose data is under hold across, the average Microsoftie has about 31 gigabytes of searchable, processable data. So I'm excluding from that figure desktop materials that is just completely not likely to be relevant material in a litigation. These are the business records that we're really looking for. So I'll exclude the system files when I'm imaging hard drives. We'll exclude pictures of people's kids or their music libraries. But we'll just take their documents, the files that are likely to be relevant in a litigation matter, and combine that with their email and their SharePoint content and the rest of the data that we're managing. On a per custodian basis, about 31 gigs per custodian, and across 44 custodians per case, 1.3 terabytes of data. So you can see across 41 cases per year, if I had to download over a terabyte of content per case and keep it in an offline archive or an offline repository, just how horribly that would balloon year after year. As we get to know the case, one of the things that our attorneys will do is work with opposing counsel to figure out who, and do a bunch of internal custodian interviews, witness interviews, to figure out who the really relevant players are in a litigation matter, and find, of the 44 people who've received legal hold notices, who are the really relevant individuals who we should focus in on and collect their data, who's making it onto the initial disclosures, who are actually expected to be deposed and testify at trial. Find that it's on average 10 custodians whose data we're actually searching for these matters. So that means that we're boiling down our universe for the case from 1.3 terabytes to the really likely to be within scope 300 gigabytes of their data. Now, if we did what we used to do as in long before 2009, we would just collect the data and hand it off to somebody. And if we did that today, for every gigabyte that we give to those litigation support vendors who would receive the data and process it for us, they would charge us $200 per gigabyte. I mean, that seems to be the rack rate these days for what litigation support vendors charge to accept data and process it and get it into a searchable state. But for everything that we send them, all 307 gigs, they charge us 200 gigs. So about $61,000 per case in just processing charges alone, just to get the data into a searchable state, so they can then go to the same people that I'm working with day in, day out, outside counsel, ask them, what is it that you're looking for? Because obviously counsel doesn't want to look through everything. They want to find the subset of content that's really worth looking into, and then only progress that content along through the linear review tool. So outside counsel would tell them, these are the filters, here are the keywords we're looking for, the date ranges, the domain filters, et cetera, to cull down that 307 gigabytes to find just what they want to review. But if we were paying $61,000 per case across 41 cases a year, that's $2.5 million in processing charges alone, not to mention the amount of data they charge us per month to host that data for us in that searchable state, right? Just a bunch of waste, and it's a bunch of content that's not relevant, shouldn't be outside the protection of our firewall. So instead of having some lit support vendor do our processing for us, we take advantage of the fact that data lives in an already processed state in Office 365 and Exchange 2013 and SharePoint 2013 on-prem. The data's already crawled. It's crawled as it's created, essentially. So we can go in and access the eDiscovery Center, run our queries, right? We'll just talk to outside counsel, say, what are you looking for? They give us a list of keywords. We'll go run them, find the subset of content, do some back and forth to really narrow it down. But on average, we can cull away 94% of the custodian's raw content and actually have to download and process and review only 23 gigabytes, right? The surviving 6% of the custodian's raw data on average. So when we are only actually handing off the 6% of the custodian content to the lit support vendor, our processing charges drop down to just about $4,500 per case. And so we're saving about $2.3 million per year in processing charges alone. Not to mention, hosting 23 gigs per month per case versus 307 gigs per month per case. We're also reducing the monthly hosting costs as well. So it makes a lot of sense for us to do our culling in-house, but we found out that managing the review was a lot less efficient amongst the small team that we actually have. Maybe I should actually tell you about that. So I work in the litigation group. I report to our director of eDiscovery, and I've got 3 other counterparts. So there are 4 eDiscovery program managers who are responsible for managing the technical aspects of discovery across all of our active cases, right? All those 41 cases per year. We're the 4 people who are processing the data, getting it into a searchable state, to the extent that we actually have to do that processing work anymore. We used to have to do a lot of work to do it. Our old workflow looked a lot like this, where we didn't have the data didn't live in an already processed state. We'd have to go out and do a bunch of collections. We'd export content from mailboxes, the entirety of the mailbox. We'd image hard drives. We'd download content from SharePoint, which is really frustrating before SharePoint 2013 rolled out, because there's no way to export in bulk, right? I mean, the best thing that we had was the Explorer view, and so we could download content that way, but it's hard not to, affect the the date created, date last modified metadata when exporting out through Explorer view. It is very difficult to download the web pages themselves in a format that could be easily reviewed by counsel. It was very manual, right? So extracting content from SharePoint before we had the eDiscovery Center was a real bear. We'd download content from file shares. Anywhere our custodians indicated they're maintaining data, we'd go out, we'd collect it, and then our paralegals, after having done the collection, would upload a copy of it for preservation's sake into a litigation data repository. Back before we had the ability to do all this stuff within our own network, we actually had, we were paying a third party to manage that litigation data repository for us, right? So we were paying, per gig per month to keep it off at their data center. And then once it had all been collected for the case, the lawyers had said on day one, hey, here's your 10 custodians, go get their data, and we want to run these search terms against it. On that day, they're hoping to get the results, but of course it kicks off a process where first spend like a week collecting the content and then uploading it into the litigation data repository, at which point we then take the third working copy of the content that was collected and put that into a litigation data minimization tool, just a processing tool. We used to use a third-party vendor's tool that was kind of industry standard at the time, and it was a very expensive tool. We had to go spend several days getting trained and certified and pass a test in order to be able to use it. And then using it was a real process. It was something that we had to kind of keep churning 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in order to meet these deadlines. Spend a week collecting the data, maybe a week processing the data, because of course this is outside of our network. So whatever we downloaded and try to process in there, it can't index what's encrypted, right? And so it indexes what it can index. We'll have to do some remediation, some searches to find the encrypted content, export that, run it through a decryption tool, re-import it, re-index it, and do this feedback loop of constant kind of churn and burn in order to get the data just into a searchable state before we can then work with counsel, run the keyword queries, filter the data, generate the hit-by-turn reports, tell people what we're actually, what our review set is going to be versus what's going to get left in that tool. Download the content from there and hand it off to a litigation support vendor who then imports the subset of content, right, that surviving 6% of the data into a linear review tool. 99% of the time, the eDiscovery vendor we're using is a company called Lighthouse eDiscovery, and they're using a tool called Cura's Relativity to manage the review process. So we'll download the content, hand it off to them, they'll put it in the review tool. Takes a couple days of processing to get it into that state before the review attorneys can actually get their hands on it, right? So about 2 weeks have passed by 2 to 3 weeks have passed by at this time before the attorneys can actually start seeing the data that they wanted on day one, right? So they go through, they make their decisions. This document is responsive. That document's privileged, needs to be redacted. This other document is irrelevant and doesn't have to be produced. Big, expensive process there. Lighthouse eDiscovery manages, that database and then works with review counsel to actually get the data set that needs to be produced, converted into, the near-native TIFFs, and ultimately produced to the other side. Big, long process, saved us a ton of money, right? I mean, even though this was difficult and this was time-consuming and we had to spend a lot of money on that third-party data minimization tool in order to do that, well, we saw an ROI pretty quickly. Of course, work-life balance went to hell. And there were, long stretches of time, and it always happened to be over the summer, right? There were a couple of years where from July 1st through, mid-September, I was working 7 days a week, 16-hour days just to get the data through the overall system. Fortunately, this caught the attention of our information protection team. People, on the development side at Microsoft who were saying, why does it have to be so bad? What could we do to make this easier for you? Why do you have to process data offline? I mean, information workers need to search this stuff. Can't you utilize the existing infrastructure that we're using for enterprise search to be able to do the same types of eDiscovery searches? And my answer was no. We need to search a lot deeper in the documents. We need to be able to run a far more sophisticated queries. We need to make sure that nothing's getting changed and everything needs to be, completely immutable and preserved in place. And, fortunately, had some really, really creative and bright people that were dedicated to doing what I thought. Honestly, when they said we think we can replace this for you, I laughed at them. I said, I don't think you guys know what you guys are getting yourselves into. You're talking about boiling the ocean. But lo and behold, they did it. They delivered really incredible tools that enabled us to, move our internal process to something that looks a lot more like this. I don't have to do as much collection work before I can do the searching anymore because data lives in an index state. I don't have to do a lot of collection in order to preserve because it can be held immutably in where it lives now. So my process, you see, if we start from the bottom this time around, nothing has changed there. I'm outsourcing every step of the way that I used to outsource, and the vendors didn't even feel a difference when we switched over to the Office 365 approach to managing our eDiscovery. They still receive the data in a native format. They still have to get it into the review tool and batch it out for the review attorneys. And the only real key difference that they felt was that they get the content a lot faster because I can do in a matter of hours what it used to take me a few weeks to do. Up there in the blue section, everything that we're responsible for, we'll get sued. council says, here's the data we need to preserve. I can go into SharePoint, create a case in the eDiscovery Center, create eDiscovery sets, and associate the sources that are relevant to that case there, and apply in-place hold. Right? The end users don't necessarily know about that. We'll manage the legal hold notification process through a different tool. This doesn't actually send notifications out for us. So it may be clandestine or it may be above board, but we'll create eDiscovery sets, apply in-place hold, reach across SharePoint, OneDrive for Business, Exchange. Through Exchange, we can get Skype for Business, or what was formerly referred to as link content. We've got, Microsoft lives in a hybrid environment. Most of our content is in Office 365 in the multi-tenant environment, but we still have some on-prem footprints, and we have SharePoint 2013 on-prem configured to crawl some network file shares that we have on-prem. So when we have to collect content from people's local desktops, we'll bring the data, put it onto these file shares where it's stored by custodian, by collection. We'll import the PSTs back into Exchange, but we'll use the SharePoint eDiscovery Center as the main interface to search across all that content, find the data sets that we need to actually review, and then download just that 6% of the custodian content that we want to hand off. We are using all of that out of box. There's no special sauce at Microsoft. We were asked to, be the guinea pigs, run this like our customers would run this. No third-party content, nothing unique that gives us better functionality than what you guys have, right? We're just out there in multi-tenant, just like a lot of you, using the eDiscovery Center in an out-of-box configuration. The one thing that we did have to build, and this will be the last thing I cover before I just show a quick run-through of the eDiscovery Center, is an offline intranet tool that helps us catalog the content that we've collected from our end users' local desktops and all the offline locations. The content that I can't necessarily reach through Office 365's eDiscovery Center. So we still have to collect that content. We created a series of Windows file shares. We have a SQL database with a web UI, and we just go to an intranet site. When it comes time to search, here are the 10 custodians who we need to search. We'll go to this intranet site and look up the custodians there, find all the locations where their data may be. It tells us where their mailboxes are, where their data is on file shares. It gives us the history of all the collections that have ever been managed for them. This is also where we go to add new content. Whenever we go collect from somebody who's been collected from before, we'll copy the data to a file share, then we'll come here, add the collection. That will kick off a process where this tool will go look on that staging file share, find the content that's attributed to this particular custodian, Satya Nadella, for example. And of course, he's been collected from a handful of times before. And so it'll go and find his new collection, merge it with the content on the file share that has been collected from him in the past. The content's kind of organized by custodian, by collection on that file share. So if you look at this screenshot I've got here, what was collected from him in his first collection was called Collection 137, and the data is stored there in that subfolder, foldered as it was received from him. Every step of the way the metadata is being preserved. We're not altering, we're not leaving fingerprints when we copy across like this, but it'll move that data there, store it there. It'll find the PSTs that are in the subsequent collections and actually import them back into Exchange for us using just the standard Microsoft PowerShell scripts that, everything that's available to our customers to import the data back into Exchange Online so we can search it. So I'll go to this UI, find the custodians, find the mailboxes that their data lives in, find the file shares where their data lives, add them to eDiscovery sets, and go about my way, right? Go search the content and find the data set that we actually need to download for review. So I'm going to now switch over and show a quick demo of the eDiscovery Center. To kind of speed things along, I already went and created the site, but the notion behind the eDiscovery Center for people who are not familiar with it is it's just a SharePoint site collection, and you build a sub-site underneath that site collection for each case, and you manage all your eDiscovery efforts for that case on that case site. So I've already done that. I've already created a case here, and we've got two main sections. We've got our identification and hold section up here. We can build those eDiscovery sets and associate the sources that are relevant to our case. We can do broad or very targeted preservation. We tend to preserve quite broadly at Microsoft because we don't know when we're initially sued what is really at issue here. You know, somebody will say, hey, I've got a patent that reads on calendar technology, and you guys have a bunch of products that have calendars, so you know we think you owe us some money because you haven't licensed our software. And they don't even accuse a specific product, and so of course, you know, we'll try to find the key players, but you know, because lawsuits might evolve over time, we tend to hold everything in the sources at first, and then maybe after the close of discovery, we'll come back and readjust the eDiscovery sets and say, well, now that you know we know the case a lot better, we can limit what's being held, and we'll narrow down what's held. But we'll do that through eDiscovery sets, and of course you can have multiple eDiscovery sets. Sometimes it makes sense for a certain set of custodians to have everything they have held in place, and a different subclass of custodians for a given case might be that you know we only need to keep their content that relates to X or Y or Z within these dates or from these senders or something. So we can create multiple eDiscovery sets and manage them as kind of atomic units and apply preservation consistently across all the sources within each set, but it could be different you know, from one set to another. And then we'll use the query section down here to find and compare search terms and find the data sets that we want to download. So I've already created one eDiscovery set here for our finance team, hypothetically, in my demo tenant. We can add and manage sources really quickly and easily. I've already added 2 mailboxes to SharePoint sites. Well, one SharePoint site, one OneDrive for Business. I just want to point out here, this is a really useful tool for helping us to find not just the stuff that you know is easy, the stuff you know, for active employees whose data is online and available. This also will help us search across the inactive mailboxes that belong to former employees whose data is still relevant. So this, you know, I'm not at a loss. I don't have to collect the PST just because somebody's left the company anymore. I can actually get to theirs. And in order to add a bunch of mailboxes at once, because this can search 10,000 mailboxes at once now, we can actually take advantage of the distribution list. And it'll go and actually, I can add one distribution list and hit OK, and it'll actually go and expand it for me and bring in all the individual people who are on that distribution group individually. So if they leave the DL tomorrow, they don't escape my hold, they don't escape my preservation settings here. So I just went ahead and added a few more names by just adding that one DL. If I wanted to do what I typically do, which is just enable in-place hold across everything, I just check enable in-place hold and hit save, and I'm done, right? The content that's there now is going to be preserved. The content that's added to any of those sources is going to be preserved until I come back and revise this setting. Another thing that's real nice about in-place hold versus litigation hold is it's rather hard for IT, like our accounts team, to supersede. Sometimes they'll, without an appreciation for the importance of legal hold, maybe they'll just say, well, I need to lift litigation hold so I can go ahead and get rid of the content in this mailbox. And they could do that without checking with me. In-place hold is a lot more difficult for them to just go and do something kind of cavalier, because only people with eDiscovery user permissions can actually set and lift in-place holds. So I have fewer accidents these days now that we're using in-place hold. People can't just go and flippantly turn off the setting and expunge data that they really shouldn't be doing. So moving right along, typically what happens, you can create queries individually. You can go in and see a bunch of rich ways of filtering the data. It's not just keyword queries, even though you've got all your Boolean operators and nested queries. You've got the proximity, you've got ordered proximity, which is kind of a step above a lot of other tools that are out there on the market. Normally, whenever you run term A within 30 of term B, it's going to mean that A has to be first, or it's going to be bidirectional, where A will be separated by up to 30 non-matching words of term B in either direction. So it could be B, 30 words, then A, or A, and 30 words, then B. Of course, we can do that, but we've also got ordered proximity, so we can make it a requirement that A is first and B is second, and sometimes that's useful. It helps us get even more aggressive calls when that's appropriate. But what I really like about the query features is that they'll each default to searching all the data that I've brought into my case in its entirety, right? So all my eDiscovery sets, everything that I've added to my case will be the scope, which is typically how I search the data. And so I can just go ahead and take a list of query terms that outside counsel has sent to me. You know, they'll usually send it over in a spreadsheet, and I might have to do some work to get the syntax just right. You know, a lot of the time outside counsel will send it to me in, you know, DT search syntax or Lucene syntax, and I'll have to do some conversions. It's really light and easy because the difference between KQL and those other query languages is rather simple and intuitive. But I'll do my conversions, and then I can go and use the list view to run all those queries at once, right? So I can say, edit this list on the queries page, and I can copy in what outside counsel sent me on that spreadsheet, right? And they gave me a name for each query and then the actual query for each query. If they didn't give me a name, I can actually just use the query as the name as well. But I'll just copy them in there, say stop editing this list, select them all, and go up here to my ribbon and say update the statistics. And I'll go run all these queries at once against all the data set all the data that's been scoped for the case, all the sources that have been added to my eDiscovery sets, and start telling me after a couple seconds how many individual items there are in each source per each query term. Let me refresh this. Usually just takes a handful of seconds to get results. Today is going a little bit slower, of course, because that's the joys of doing live demos in front of a lot of people. But you can see they're kind of making their way in, and I can use this to be, you know, kind of a hit by term report. All right, so it's done with those 5 queries. What I wanted to do now is, you know, just get this list to outside counsel so they can be ready for their meet and confer later this afternoon. I just say export to Excel, and it'll dump this to a spreadsheet, so they'll have that kind of nice comparison. You know, if they're working with opposing counsel on, you know, what the queries should be, how should we be filtering data, what's the appropriate approach for this case, and getting opposing counsel's buy-off on this becomes a really useful tool. A lot of the time I'll also, you know, do a live desktop sharing session with outside counsel showing them my screen so we can actually go through this and run the filters, apply them live, and because it only takes a couple seconds for the queries to be applied, or if they want to, you know, kind of dig in a little bit deeper into the query and say, well, for this particular one, let's only look at some of the search results themselves. You know, we've got a preview pane down here. It's definitely not designed to be a review tool, but at least it kind of helps us orient ourselves in the data, and they can, you know, maybe find some not causes that they want to use, or they can dig in and see that, oh, the 43 items that are responsive to this query, you know, only one of them is coming from Alex's mailbox, or, you know, search isn't actually working on this particular one, but 28 are coming from the Project Retail SharePoint site and that sort of thing. Or, you know, let's say we only care about our emails and IMs. We don't care about the contacts or meetings or tasks. And then on the SharePoint side, let's say we only care about, you know, PowerPoints, Word docs, and web pages. We don't care about the zips for maybe. There's other properties we can narrow it down by too. You know, we can say so-and-so has to be a participant on the thread, meaning they're a sender on any of the recipient fields, whether that's CC, BCC, or, you know, 2. Or the subject line has to be this, or, you know, the author has to be that. And we can narrow down these data sets even more deeply that way and find the content that we actually think is worthwhile to export. And I can either export the individual query directly from here, or I can go back to my list and export a bunch of I can export a bunch of them at once. So I could just select them all, go up to my ribbon, and say, say export here, and that takes me to one more page where I have some options as to what I want my export format to be. Do I want to use deduplication against the Exchange content? Do I want to include versions from the SharePoint sources if versioning was turned on? Do I want to include the items that, you know, I've got my known search results, the items that have hit on those queries that I've run, but then there may be some other content in the network that isn't fully indexed for whatever reason. You know, maybe it's a file type that we don't support. Maybe it's above a certain size. Maybe it's, just an item that needs OCR, something's password protected, for whatever reason, I mean, we're typically, back in the days when we used the third-party tool, we were used to doing a lot of remediation, finding what the edges of what we could make searchable were, and then doing some work to push those edges. So this button here, kind of as a best practice, allows us to continue that workflow. We'll download the unknown items alongside the known items, and just go. Well, I've got to give the export a name. And to move things right along, right? It just downloads the content to wherever I have write permissions. It pops a local client on my desktop, builds a list of the items that it needs to download. So if there's any sort of network interruption while I'm working, if something errors out in the export, I can actually pick up from where it left off. I don't have to restart from scratch. And it'll download to wherever I want to write this stuff to. So I did a couple exports earlier to kind of show you the export format. I did a standard export here. It drops everything into a folder named for the name of the export. So I called this one Sales Investigation. I downloaded my Exchange data into separate PSTs per mailbox searched with the name of the export set and the name of the mailbox and a date and timestamp and the name of the file, so I can always trace back what this actually came from. The SharePoint data is downloaded in a folder hierarchy that matches the overall shape of the site. The web pages are downloaded as MHT files, which can really easily be handed off to outside counsel. They can understand and treat this as a document. It's not something that they have to work on compiling all the different HTML components of a web page. Documents themselves are downloaded in their native format in a folder hierarchy that matches where they actually were on the site. I get a main export summary telling me, the story of what I did to effectuate the download, what sources I searched, who did the work, when it was done, whether there were any errors, what filters were applied to the sources. And I get this manifest file, which is also an EDRM XML manifest file that has the list of all the native metadata that we have in the in-network pre-download metadata that exists for all those items that were inside my export set is logged in that file, so I can use that as a load file to whatever my review tool is going to be. If I used deduplication, I get the same kind of folder structure for what I export, but instead of a separate PST, I get just one PST with all the unique items, and I can use that manifest file to reduplicate offline later on. So I can I can aggressively minimize the data set before I actually have to download it and hand it off to outside counsel or hand it off to my litigation support vendor who's going to charge me per gigabyte. But we don't lose the ability to tell, when this was in Katie's mailboxes and her sent items, when this is in Sarah's mailboxes and her deleted items. So it's a great way of helping us to minimize what we actually have to download. It speeds up our download process, and it also reduces the cost that we have to incur to process that data set. Right now, of course, because we're talking about how we manage our discovery response for active cases, I'm talking to you about, production material, stuff that's been out for a couple years now. You've probably heard that we acquired Equivio. Really excited to get Zoom integrated into our internal processes, and maybe at the next conference I'll be here talking about how we're actually doing that. But of course, because we're talking about real life issues, we're using production systems for that, and we don't actually have that integrated yet. But it's something that we'll definitely be excitedly working on in the near future to extend our reach even further. Before I switch over to hand this off to Nagar, is there a quick question?
Yeah, the eDiscovery section you're in there, is that available to everyone, or do you create
The eDiscovery Center that I just showed is part. So if you've it's part of the enterprise SKU. So if you're in E3 or E4, it's just there. This is just waiting for somebody to create the site collection in SharePoint. You've got to create the trust relationship between SharePoint and Exchange, make sure that you've got your eDiscovery users permission with the eDiscovery user role, but then this is just there waiting for you to use. Yeah. Before Nagar takes over, they gave us some shirts to hand off. I've got a few of these. I'm not a very good pitcher, but I'll hand out a shirt. If you guys have questions, if you want to wait to the end, great. We'll distribute some other nice, fancy, limited edition Microsoft shirts as well. But thanks for your attention. I'll come back up for questions later, but I want to get out of Nagar's way and let her take the floor.
Do you want to try the shirts before we start? Hi, everyone. So my name is Nagar, and I manage the most of the Office 365 function at Rogers. I'm a technical manager, less of a legal expert. Maybe I give you guys a little information. Rogers, it's a Canadian company. I don't know if there are folks from Canada. I know the third row are, but communication and media company. If you're American, you can compare it to AT&T, and if you're British or European, probably Vodafone, I think, is a good comparison. It's the largest communication company in Canada, and we have, as you can imagine, a large population of users. Rogers, as a whole, has a lot of brands and a very diverse variety of companies and line of businesses. For instance, we own a sport team, we own some sports channels. We also, if you're ever in Toronto, you're probably roaming on our network. You can take a look at your phone. But this is about how we had a journey of going from a bunch of old Microsoft products, and we're trying to move to newer products, and how that will help us do eDiscovery better. So this is really our journey of going through Microsoft products. So I call it the evolution of Microsoft at Rogers, because it's really how the products changed throughout the time, and how we're trying to make our way through these products and go to the better products that they offer now, and that makes our lives as IT people much easier. So to start, how many people here are actual technical people and manage like Exchange or SharePoint or... Okay, great. A lot of you. Perfect. And how many of you are fully on Office 365? A lot less hands. Okay. How many of you are transitioning? Okay, that's a good number. So this is sort of, especially the first part, because we are fully migrated from Exchange 2003 to Exchange Online. And just to give you a sense of how large the environment is, we have about 45,000 active mailboxes, and they're fully migrated. Our migration took about 7 months, and we had a huge eVault implementation. We didn't migrate the eVault data. We only migrated a small portion of it. But because we have retention policies in place, that data will expire very soon. So we have no plans to migrate that. The second, and this is just to, if you look at the left side, this is what EJ was talking about, data collections. These are the points that we have to go and collect the data, and this is how it moved. So for Exchange, it moved to Exchange Online. We are also collecting data that's shared amongst the teams. They could be on the SharePoint 210. They could be on these file servers that we call them team shared drives. And we have some teams that they didn't like either of those options because they're both internal. And they went out of the way to purchase some products. Some of them start with D. Some of them start with G, and you can figure it out. But they're there. And once we want to collect that data, we actually have to go find out what team has what and where it is and collect that data, which could be a task on its own. And last but not least is where users are putting the data. The data we recommend they put there. And these are just pure network file shares for users. Everyone gets a certain amount of space. And we really recommend our users put their data there. So this is one of the places we certainly search when we need to get the custodian data. So plans for SharePoints and all those team drives is to go to SharePoint Online. And plan for network file shares is to go to OneDrive. And these are all undergoing, but the only portion that's completed is Exchange Online. So how we used to do data collection and preservation before we migrated, for all the communication, we actually went to the user's mailbox and we grabbed all the data. And for eVault, we actually went and used the MMC on eVault, and it is a tedious job. Has anyone ever done it? It's really hard, and it's just slow. Grab those. The users had very small mailboxes, so our users are heavily PSD users. How many of your users are using PSDs? It would be a lot. Even if you have large mailboxes, somehow users love PSD files. And also, link and mobile devices, whatever communication went through that. So we had to collect all of those, and for our preservation, we actually collect those and put them on local storage. This is infrastructure built specifically for our eDiscovery team. So they have access to it, no one else would have access to it, and they share the data as they will. For SharePoint, and all those shared drives that we discussed, we were using Robocopy, and for team or personal drives, we also were using Robocopy. And again, all of these data that's being collected goes on those network storage for those teams. So this is our goal and our plan for after we migrate everything. So this is the end result. What we're looking forward to is to collect those data from all those sources that we just discussed and all those little bits and pieces. We just have to go to one place to collect all those data. And it will greatly improve the time that we have to spend to look for that data. And we think it actually improved the accuracy, because what are the chances, if you look at the previous slide, what are the chances I'm going to miss one of those on the left side? Like, you know, the user mailbox or eVault data, or one of them actually can fail, or I can get the wrong data and I could do a wrong search. We do very targeted searches and with strange, long conditions. So the chance that I'm going to fail on one of those is very high. But if I'm doing this once and all in one place, that is the eDiscovery Center, there's very little chance I'm going to make a mistake. There's very little chance that I'm going to have any trouble finding the data. And even if I do, I can simply just rerun it. I'll just grab the live data for me that it's just coming through the systems, and everything is going to be there. So this is our end goal. We are not there yet, as I mentioned. We are still migrating SharePoint, and we are still migrating our OneDrive data. There's no OneDrive folks here, but hopefully they'll fix the sync so we can start migrating aggressively. But that is our goal, to put everything on these online services. So you might think to yourself, like, how did you guys manage the migration for so many mailboxes? Or, like, I know a lot of people go through that, and I have to say there's a few things that really helped us, and I'll make that recommendation to anyone going through migrations. The first and foremost, it's a retention policy. So I'll have to thank our legal department to actually putting their foot down and saying, all general population mailboxes get 2 years retention policy. No one gets to keep their data. But, there's always a but. But in about 1,000 people get to keep more or less. So how do you manage that? It's a big, big issue with a lot of administrations. A lot of time is spent to separate those, either executives or legal department or whoever it is, and you want to keep their data around longer than other people. So moving to Office 365, and especially Exchange Online, makes that much, much easier than having that data on-premise. You can't even imagine putting retention policy on PSD files. That is just not possible. The second thing that we did that it really helped us within this migration was we banned PSDs. So our legal department also helped us with that and saying, you can, as a user, you can no longer use PSD files. You have a large mailbox on Office 365, go move all your PSD files to your mailbox, and you have to get rid of it. And we actually put in place policies on the desktops to remove any PSDs, and the user can't mount PSDs anymore. So that really helped bring all this data to one place. So I really encourage you guys as an Exchange admin to have this talk with your legal department to put these policies in place. It really helps you with getting a unified environment and really easy to manage. And last but when you're trying to apply retention, I don't know has anyone done retention policy on eVault? It's dreadful. When we did the retention, we had petabytes of data on our eVault environment. And when we applied those tags on eVault, it took about 7 months to delete the data. So it's really, really a slow process on eVault. So, but on the Office 365, it's quite easy. You just build your retention tags, and you can simply build one policy based on those tags, or you can build multiple policies. And if you're a PowerShell, like I'm more so of a PowerShell person, you can just run it for your whole tenant, having the user list, or if you're more so of a portal person, you just have to go through and apply this policy. But it is quite simple. If you haven't given it a shot, I strongly encourage you to go and try it out. And the second thing that EJ mentioned, it's very simple to put the data that you preserve, or even the data that's coming in and out, on litigation hold, in place hold. It is quite simple. Again, it's just a simple click, and you're there. Like if you had that anywhere else, previously when we were trying to search the data, and we had to go restore backup tapes on Exchange 2003 and find that data that it wasn't on hold before because now we needed it. But here, if you, like we have this list of users that we always have to put on legal hold because of the position they hold in the company or what they do, and it's simply just putting it on in place hold. The user doesn't even see it. It's all invisible to them, but it is there for you to search if you need it. And if you're like us, that we have a large population of users with different personas, so as I said, executives, legal folks, lawyers, and you probably have to apply different tags to them. So someone can hold their data for 5 years. The other person can hold their data for 2 years and a little bit more, or certain kind of data that they have to hold, or they have to move it to another folder. This is where you can really come up with a process. Like I give you an example of what we have done, and it might work well for you. So we have legal department put together a list of the users and what they need for each user. And this is simply just Excel sheet that they give us. And in the columns in front of the users, they tell us if they want them on in-place hold or they want them on no retention policy whatsoever. Someone might need 5 years of data. Someone might need. So we standardize what they want, and they give us a sheet. And it's shared in a shared location on one of our servers. And they built a script that runs through this list and just applies whatever they ask to that user. This is a great tool, and I strongly recommend any admin or any company to do that because it increases your level of certainty of, I've done that. The script runs every week, so if legal department goes and updates that sheet, it automatically runs, automatically grabs that data and puts it in place, so it's preserved if they need to be on legal hold. And the beauty of it just takes the human error out of it. So if there's no mistake to be made there, if we even get logs out of the script when it runs, so it tells us if the username doesn't match something, or if there's 2 users with the same data, or there's something, we get reports from it, but it works beautifully. So I strongly encourage you to, if you're moving to O365, try this for your variety of personas that you have in Office 365, and it works really, really well. With that said, that's our small story of moving to Exchange Online, Office 365. If you haven't attended yesterday's eDiscovery session, the product manager is sitting right there. There's great features they're adding to the eDiscovery Center that EJ was just demonstrating. One of the things that we need, and it's going to be built, is searching all mailboxes. We do that often. And right now you can run 10,000. So if you're less than 10,000 users, you're good. But if you're like us and you like to run searches on 45,000, you need that portal. So that's one upcoming feature that it's promised. And there's more coming. As they said, they had an acquisition that they announced yesterday. That's very exciting. We're all looking forward to it. If you have any questions in regard to migrations, transitioning from on-prem to cloud or eDiscovery, I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions. But this is the end of the presentation for us. Out of materials.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for coming. Evaluations, if you guys could take time and submit evaluations. We'd really appreciate it. But I especially, if you came here hoping to hear something that you didn't hear, first I'd encourage you to walk up to a mic and let's ask it, because I think that we still have time before lunch to get those covered. But also, if you want to put down any comments, things that could make this more useful if you were to see me next year and you want to learn more about certain things, let me know. I'll definitely take your advice very well. But we've got a question here.
You didn't show where in Office 365, and excuse me, I'm new to Office 365, you tell to keep all emails for the user to be saved.
Okay, so because your mic wasn't working, the question is that where in Office 365 can we go to tell the user that they need to keep all their data, or where
Not
can
the
we?
user, from the admin
But where can
side.
we actually enable hold on that? Yeah, so forgive me for not being clear enough. We can do that right here in the eDiscovery Center, right? So this is in Office 365.
But isn't it after the fact, though? You have to enable to save all communication for the user, so then later you can do this. So basically you can say, search across all emails for this user.
So we can actually do that from this interface as well. We can effectuate the hold first, and so usually that will be done, day one, we receive a complaint and we want to get a legal hold notice out. So you're saying that even before we even know that a custodian is relevant for a lawsuit, you want to make sure that you're holding all their data. How do we protect all their content?
Yeah.
So
you
at
don't
Microsoft,
know that they will sue me, and I will, God forbid, someone else. User X will be subject of legal investigation, right? You don't know that
Right.
before, so you have to keep all emails basically.
well, we don't have to. I mean, our approach is to not keep everything for an end user. If they're not on a legal hold, there's corporate retention policies, and that governs how long their email should live if it relates to this topic versus that topic versus the other topic, right? And so it's up to them. Or if I were like Rogers, email would live for 2 years after it's received, right? You can do that. You can go and set the policies in the Exchange admin console in Office 365. You want me to show you where to go to do that?
No. My question is, so I get email. I deleted my email. I deleted this email from deleted items. And tomorrow, I'm under investigation. So legal has to run the search to produce this email.
Yes.
So if you go to this console and say, okay, search for me as a user,
Yep.
you will not be able to produce this email unless you enable somewhere, put a check mark, hold all emails for this user
Right.
for whatever retention period is.
That's actually exactly what I did here in the eDiscovery set. So by putting your name in my eDiscovery set and checking Enable In Place Hold, that will hold everything that's there. It'll also hold anything that you've deleted that hasn't been purged from your recoverable items. So you'll hit delete.
Moving forward, it will hold. But
Exactly.
for previous emails, they gone.
It'll hold everything. So the concept of single item recovery, right? If you, when you hit delete from something in Outlook, it goes to deleted items folder. When you go to deleted items folder and you hit delete on something there, it goes into the recoverable items deletions folder. And it'll live there if you're not on hold for a set amount of time, whatever you have the single item recovery limit set for. 14 days is the default. So let's say you're not on hold. 14 days after you delete something from your deleted items, it'll still be recoverable and discoverable in your recoverable items folder. After 14 days after you've double deleted it, it'll be gone. So tomorrow I put you on legal hold and I enable in-place hold in your mailbox, everything that you've deleted within the last 2 weeks, depending on what your single item recovery limit was set for, but let's say it's the default, everything you deleted for the last 2 weeks is still going to be held. Things that you deleted longer than 2 weeks ago, that's gone. Gone is gone. I can't search, if you weren't on hold before, I don't, arguably I don't have a need to search whatever you got rid of before there was a legal hold obligation for you. So that would be gone, but otherwise it's going to get what...
Well, I came to this session to see if we can replace, by moving to cloud and using eDiscovery, we can replace what we have for legal discovery and searches and all this stuff to make us compliant, and it's clearly not, because we hold every single email.
If you want to do that, you can do that. You can absolutely do that. Right?
I think his confusion is retention policy. You got to set retention policy before you start capturing data, unless you already have an archiving process. I think that's what the confusion is here.
Yeah, so if you want to set a policy to hold everything, you can definitely apply proactively, archive everything for each user before. If you don't want anything to ever disappear and it's not associated with a legal hold, but you just want to make sure that no email ever disappears, you don't actually have to journal it to some other archiving solution. You can actually preserve it in place as well. You just set those policies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I've got two questions. The first one is, it's highly unlikely we're going to go online because we have government contracts. So highly unlikely. So is eDiscovery available on E13, E16 on-premise?
Yes. So everything that I showed today is available on-premises as well. So if you have SharePoint 2013, Exchange 2013 on-prem, create the eDiscovery Center, create the trust relationship between those environments, and they're there.
That's great. So that now question number two. We have a diverse population, many hundreds of thousands of mailboxes, and some of the acquisitions, those businesses use PST.
Yeah.
Now we want to retain the PST. How do we collect PSTs into eDiscovery?
So PSTs, preserving them, right? If you just want to preserve them, you can just hold them in cold storage, put them on a file share that litigation manages or whatever. You don't have to do anything. When you want to search within them, you actually have to import them back into Exchange. And that's, I think, what your real question is asking. So how do I get a PST back into Exchange?
Okay.
What we did, did you
So you either export them or you just retain them and collect them as you previously did.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll just...
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your question. We've got shirts and...
So I have a quick question about your...
Okay.
Sorry. I have a quick question. I saw in the migration piece which you did, you had mobile device data inside eVault when you went to Office 365. Are you archiving mobile device data right now at all, or is there a possibility any way you can do mobile device data archiving today with Office 365?
Archiving mobile devices data right now, but we hope, like if you take most likely, like I'm hoping that Intune would have that capability to collect that data and add it.
But could you do it in eVault before? Mobile device data?
The mobile device data?
Yeah, like text messages, that kind of thing. Okay.
We'll actually run certain softwares on the mobile device itself. So I can give you some names of the software that you can put. That's really, the reason I'm not mentioning that not necessarily device specific at this point. Someone has a BlackBerry, it's a different thing. Someone has a Samsung, it's a different thing. Nokia is different. So it really depends on that. You have to see what the custodians have.
Okay, thanks.
Do you know if there are any plans to do anything for SMIME encrypted items?
Do we
Maybe-
have plans to do
yeah,
anything for
maybe.
SMIME encrypted items?
Yeah.
Nothing that I'm aware of. There's definitely nothing on the roadmap. The main encryption type supported in Office 365 is RMS, and that's really easy to handle, especially from an eDiscovery perspective, because if it's encrypted using RMS in the network, we can read past that and discover content that's RMS encrypted and it's downloaded and it's RMS encrypted state. So I'd have to remove that before I hand it off to counsel. But the same doesn't exist for SMIME. SMIME is a lot less common at Microsoft, but it's based on the user certificate on their local machine as well.
Some of the other tools out there, you can export the keys into the tool.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there was any plans for that.
Nothing on the roadmap. It's something that I feel for you when it comes to that. That's difficult. It's something that when you check that enable or include uncrawlable items, include unsearchable items, those items are downloaded in that data set too. So if you do have an offline solution that you could use for that subset, you'll at least be able to get those items downloaded and be able to put them in there. You can identify them, but it's not going to crack them for you, and that's
Yeah, unfortunately, in many cases, it's not so much a subset as the set.
Yeah. Well, Quentin heard that, and his ears perked up, so he understands the importance, and, sometime down the line, maybe there will be some magic, but right now, you can start using RMS maybe instead of SMIME. I don't know if that's an option, but that would make your lives a bit easier, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's our last shirt. You got our last limited edition shirt, so I apologize to the other questioners, but please do keep the questions coming.
A couple of questions here. I think they're quick answers. Is your process for preservation of chain of custody and evidence throughout that process already proven in court and admissible, as opposed to other quote-unquote third-party products and processes?
Well, so the chain of custody story, a lot of that's told through the export summaries. You can see who searched for what, when they downloaded it, and every item that gets downloaded through the eDiscovery Center is downloaded with a hash value, as it was in the network. So, if you were to tamper with it before you produce it, change even a character within the item, it would have a different hash value.
So you're getting a hash of the source
pre-export
before you
hash,
ever,
yes.
Well, pre-export, but I'm talking about even at collection time. Are you hashing it?
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the content from a desktop that will collect.
Well, either that or any of the other mechanisms, because I saw where you had to take some data from one system and ingest it into another. Well,
Yeah.
before you do that move, you theoretically should get a hash of it before it's moved, right?
Right.
You are technically modifying it as you move it, so.
Not the substance of the files. And we use robocopy, so we're not actually altering metadata either. But we're not hashing it before we collect it. And we didn't get some third-party collection tool. There are times when file authenticity may be challenged. It's usually not in litigation. It's usually more of like an internal investigation where somebody's doing something nefarious and they're going to go down swinging. If they get fired, they're going to pull every dirty trick in the book to challenge it. And in those instances when that's a risk, our internal investigations unit will use a specialized tool for that, not the standard that we use for the vast majority of our litigation matters. Those instances are far less frequent.
So I
but
got
would,
you. So you can go through a different mechanism
Yes.
to get the forensically sound
Yeah.
instance of that.
But if we did that, right, if we were to collect something and it's collected in a logical evidence file or something, that's not the type of file that we would just put into our file share, let SharePoint index and interact with that. So this isn't going to search into logical evidence files.
Okay. On your searches, do you have the ability to do the complex Boolean searches and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can do all the nested operators and proximity, et cetera.
Okay. As far as sharing the responsive data sets, I noticed that you kind of showed a manual way to export that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have other ways to export that out or publish it to council in a fashion that is maybe RMS provisioned so that they can consume it in other fashions besides the old school, run it to a disk or whatever you're doing and get it to them, right?
No, right now we're just downloading natives. We're very close to being able to export to Windows Azure. But the items, you can control who has access to that Azure container where you download the content to. We're not using RMS to protect that content right off the bat, but encryption at rest is coming, right? Yeah. So right now.
Okay. When you have multiple holds on a single custodian, does this support multiple layers of that? So if one hold is removed, the other is still
great
in
question.
place?
I'm sorry I didn't answer.
So it's not just a and or, 0 and a 1?
Yeah. So going back to the whole notion behind having a case site for each matter and you have your holds there, I can have the same source on hold for any number of cases. And it may be that in one case I'm using targeted preservation that partially overlaps what's held in another targeted preservation case. I don't have to worry about releasing case A if case B is relevant to source A. I don't have to worry about releasing case A if the same source that's relevant to case A and case B is also held by case B. Whatever subset of it or superset, it could be everything in there, that's held by case B will still be held while case B is active. So I don't have to go do that complex
So it's
audit
a
to
cumulative
figure out.
enforcement, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And could you just give me a quick blurb on exception handling?
Yeah, so what do I do with that uncrawlable subset when I download it? Yeah. We have a couple offline processing tools that will just go, the legacy stuff that we had long before we had the eDiscovery Center. And so I might put it into that. If the data set is super small, I'll probably just hand that off to Lighthouse and say, hey, in the export summary, you can see the search queries that I ran against these searches. Can you process the uncrawlable subset with some other tool that you have and run those same searches against the items there once you've processed them? So if I'm really pressed for time, maybe I'll just do that. If I've got the time and the other tools, still usable for me, I'll just go and search that, handle my exceptions there. There are some things that are, simply password protected, and I could, decrypt them and put them back into a SharePoint site that I manage and let SharePoint index that too if I didn't have an offline processing tool, or just put them in that file share and let SharePoint go at it there once I've remediated whatever it is, and I could go back and just use the same interface once I've fixed whatever needed to be remediated. But ordinarily, we'll just kind of go through that bucket brigade process, get the known hits out today, do a little bit of remediation work tonight, tomorrow supplement the data set that I handed off today with the additional hits that we found from the uncrawlable subset. Yeah. All right, thanks for your questions. One more?
Quick question.
Oh, two more.
Actually, two quick questions. We have certain data files that are just not SharePoint friendly at all. We can't store them on SharePoint. Are you going to have any features to allow us to attach external storage to SharePoint so that those can be included, or is there a plan around that?
Is there a plan around that? The need for that is appreciated. The ability to get certain file types that are not in the network, we're coming up with connectors to be able to get copies of those things pumped into Exchange, is the repository that we've chosen there. But if there's certain file types that simply can't go into SharePoint, they can't be crawled, the benefit to having them there might be preservation. If you could ultimately get there, but if they can't be crawled there, you wouldn't be able to search them. They'd always be in that uncrawlable data set anyway. So if I were you, what I would do is probably just park that under a file share and manage that.
Okay, because we have lots of design files as part of our construction firm, and those just don't play nice with SharePoint, so we have to store them other places. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the need is understood. The desire to be able to close that gap for our customers is also burning within the hearts of the information protection team. Honestly, I am not just saying that because Quentin's right there and he's the main PM on the development side of things, but really the ambition that they have and the drive to just make eDiscovery really easy for our customers, just right out of the box. Just get in here, click a couple buttons, and you're good to go, is the vision of the future that they have. So closing gaps like that is something that's pretty high on their list. Depending on the file types that you have, I can't speak specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if we had something sometime down the line to make it even better than it is today.
Then my other question is within your companies, who defines the amount of time that you hold files? We've tried to get our lawyers to define that, but they keep saying that's an IT policy, and we keep fighting back and forth.
Yeah, that's our lawyers, yeah. So I work in a litigation group. Our lawyers say this is what we need to hold, these are the things that need to be held, and that's why I work on their team, is because I can interact with, if it's beyond my scope, I can at least be that kind of Rosetta Stone between the legalese and the IT speak to make sure that the needs actually get met. But I'm with you. I think the lawyers should be the ones out there saying this is what needs to happen and advising the company. Okay. And that's how we do it here at Microsoft.
Cool.
Great. Thanks for your questions.
So users could have permissions to other people's mailboxes, or they could have permissions to, shared drives where there might be terabytes of data. Yeah. How do you deal with that? Is that a manual process to identify who has permissions to what content to pull that in, or is that part of the process specifically around SharePoint sites? People can share documents all over the place.
Two answers there. Great question. The main answer is yes, it's manual, right? Custodian and witness interviews. We'll send out a collection questionnaire and say, hey, attached is that legal hold notice you got several months ago. Time to collect your data for it. Help me understand where it all is. We know about your mailbox. We know about your OneDrive for Business site. But are there other SharePoint sites that you use? Are is there a SharePoint site mailbox that you're using? Is there something else that we don't know about? Are there other key players that should be involved? Are there other data you use Facebook for this type of thing, right? And so we'll ask, and there's a list of 23 questions or something right now, and the last one is there anything we didn't ask you that you need to tell us? So having the cooperation of the custodians is important, and it's something that we do by standard. The other thing that we can do if we don't know exactly what we're looking for is you can go into the eDiscovery Center and create a query and modify the search scope. So instead of just searching the content, the sources that you've added your eDiscovery sets and you've applied preservation to for the case, you can search all of SharePoint. And when you search all, you can run filters like show me everything that these custodians authored, or show me everything these people have modified, or something like that. And then it brings me back a list showing me the other properties that I might not be aware of. Then I can just copy them out and add them to my eDiscovery set as a source. So that's a good way of kind of surfacing those when I don't have the cooperation. And usually you want the custodians to identify as much as possible, and then you supplement what they've told you with what you can go figure out. But you're right. I'd love, especially when we're talking about replacing attachments with, stuff that's just sitting in somebody's OneDrive for Business. If that person whose OneDrive for Business the stuff is sitting in isn't on our roadmap, and yes, we have to ask the custodians to identify that. Yes, we have to, examine the documents, analyze what we're seeing to see if there are the key players whose sources we're missing. But finding ways of just having that automatic is definitely a desire for the future.
Yeah, so are you guys, either of you guys using third-party tools to do kind of permission discovery in SharePoint or
No.
or file shares like Varonis, tools like that?
Just use Exchange native tools like we run PowerShell.
More for like unstructured data though. That's my question. That seems to be our biggest challenge.
We actually have more targeted searches, so we run it on everything that we possibly think is going to have any of the data. So it's a little different between us.
Right.
It's like we have targeted.
We're a lot like you,
Right.
specifically with. Yeah.
So we just include any mailboxes that possibly, like we go after the teams, like even if it's just one person, we go after the whole team.
Yep.
And we actually go after all the shared mailboxes as well.
Right.
And we make the conditions based on whatever we think will fit. So that's how we do it.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming.
One question, couple questions. How do you handle discovery and preservation for Yammer and voicemail?
All right, voicemail, easier. Voicemail for us goes into Exchange, right? We've got it goes into Exchange and it's transcribed, and so we can search it using that. It's not always the greatest transcription,
Really?
but those items, because Exchange is aware that there's an attachment that's not fully searched. Well, those items are preserved anyway, right? So even if we did targeted preservation, the items that are not fully searchable are preserved. We'll treat them as responsive items so that they're not deleted even if we did targeted preservation. And so we could, work with audio processing tools if the need arose. Yammer. Yammer is something that we don't have a great eDiscovery and compliance story for yet. The concept behind it is there are third parties out there that have tools that will help you archive content from Yammer and put them back into Exchange mailboxes. And I know, but then when they're back into Exchange mailboxes, we can actually use the same eDiscovery Center to search and apply preservation there, right? And so the way that we'd apply preservation might change a little bit because we have to say, okay, well, we really need just the stuff that's here that's accessible to so-and-so. It will single instance them in that Exchange. It'll be one giant Exchange mailbox that's holding all the things that have been archived from Yammer. Companies like Smarsh, like Globanet, with a product called Merge One. There's other partners that are out there doing it until we can support it ourselves and find the best way of bringing eDiscovery straight to Yammer, which ultimately is the
on the roadmap.
hope. But until then, this is how we're connecting those dots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, quick question. So it sounds like you guys just search the mailboxes. You guys don't do any type of journaling?
We don't do any journaling.
We don't do journaling either.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then, so if the email's deleted, it's gone.
It is, and
Just
I
can't.
was just saying, for us, for folks who they think they're important enough and that they're going to be, they're going to need to search, we put them on legal hold.
Okay.
We have,
All right.
we have what, 2,000 mailboxes on legal hold.
Okay. I'm just confirming there's no requirement to put them on journal. So, okay. Thank you.
Can we search journals? So if you're journaling to another Exchange mailbox, right? So if you're journaling from Office 365 to an on-prem archive, I don't really know why you'd want to do that because you can archive in place, but let's say you do. You could use, if it's just an Exchange 2013 mailbox on-prem, you could use Exchange 2013 on-prem to search that content, or an eDiscovery Center on-prem, or if you've got hybrid Exchange running, you could use the eDiscovery Center to just reach and search that data. So yes, if you want. If you're journaling to another tool like Vault, no, we don't tie in there. And a lot of people are doing big migrations from Vault to yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for hanging out, and I'm sorry we ate into your lunch.